If you ever watched Israel Adesanya fight, you would know he's not just another UFC champion. He was a spectacle, a mix of raw talent, calculated precision, and the kind of sportsmanship that makes every fight feel like an event. But his story didn't just start at the top of the UFC. Israel was a kid from Nigeria who chased his dreams across continents, overcame struggles, and became a global icon. This is the story of Israel Adesanya. Israel Mobolaji Odunayo Oluwafemi Temitayo Olowabi Adesanya, yes, that is his full name, was born on July 22, 1989, in Lagos, Nigeria. He was the eldest of 5 children in a middle-class family. His father, Oluwafemi Adesanya, was an accountant, and his mother, Taiwo, was a nurse. They were not a family struggling to make ends meet, but like many Nigerian parents, they had very high expectations. Education was everything. The plan was simple: attend school, get good grades, and land a prestigious job. But Israel wasn't wired that way. He was different. While his classmates were obsessed with football and books, he had a deep love for anime and martial arts movies. He spent hours watching Death Note, Naruto, Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan, and Jet Li, fascinated by their movement, skill, and presence. At school, he wasn't the toughest kid in class, contrary to the Israel we know today. In fact, he was bullied a lot, something that would later shape his obsession with fighting. At 10 years old, his world would change when his family decided to move to Ghana. They stayed for about 10 months, but his parents wanted a better future for their children. So, in 2001, they made a life-altering decision to move to New Zealand. For a Nigerian kid, New Zealand was a completely different world. The culture, the people, the food, everything was new. And for someone with an accent and a very different way of life, fitting in wasn't easy. He attended Rotorua Boys High School, where he quickly realized that he stood out in ways that weren't always comfortable. The bullying continued, and instead of fighting back, he mostly avoided trouble. But this experience left an impact. He later admitted that he regretted not standing up for himself more. Despite his challenges, Israel found solace in anime, dancing, and eventually martial arts. He loved movement, rhythm, and expression, of all which would later become key elements of his fighting style. His first real exposure to combat sports came through watching British boxer Prince Nazim Hamed. The flashy entrances, the unorthodox movement, and the way Hamed toyed with his opponents all left an impression on the young Adesanya. He wasn't just drawn to the fighting, he was drawn to the artistry of it. At 18, everything changed. He watched On Bak, a Muay Thai action film starring Tony Jaa, and something clicked. The fluidity, the power, and the way the Muay Thai fighters use every part of the body as a weapon was mesmerizing. That same year, he stepped into a kickboxing gym for the first time. Little did he know that this decision would shape the rest of his life forever. Training quickly became an obsession, and he was serious about it. Within 2 years, he had built an amateur record of 32-1. It was clear that he had something special. College no longer felt like the right path, so he dropped out of his Bachelor of Science program in computer design at Universal College. At 21, he took another leap of faith. He moved to Auckland and joined City Kickboxing under Eugene Behrman. The gym was a breeding ground for elite fighters, home to names like Dan Hooker, Kai Kara-France, and Alexander Volkanovski. It was here that Adesanya transformed from a talented fighter into a complete mixed martial artist. He dominated the local kickboxing scene with an impressive 75-5 in his amateur career. That record alone showed that he was different. His striking was so fluid, calculated, and always a step ahead of his opponent. The transition from professional fighting took him across the world. He fought in China, sharpening his skills against high-level competition. His ability to read opponents, stay calm under pressure, and put on a show made him stand out. What started as an escape from bullying had now become his identity. Israel Adesanya was now fighting to prove something, to himself and to the doubters and to everyone else who ever underestimated him. Next came professional MMA. Israel Adesanya transitioned to mixed martial arts in 2012 and began fighting in the regional circuit. His striking ability, confidence, and the showmanship quickly turned him into a must-watch fighter in New Zealand. He moved through opponents with precision, racking up knockout wins and building an undefeated record. His performances made waves, and soon the UFC took notice. In 2018, Adesanya got the call. He made his UFC debut against Rob Wilkinson, a fighter known for his toughness and his grappling ability. Adesanya controlled the fight from start to finish, using his reach and striking accuracy to pick Wilkinson apart. In the second round, he closed the show with a TKO victory. With that, the world knew his name. His ability to entertain outside the octagon matched his skill inside it. He carried himself like a champion long before holding the belt, and every fight that he fought brought him closer to that goal. He dismantled Marvin Vettori, overwhelmed Brad Tavares in a 5-round masterclass, and took Derek Brunson out in the first round with a knockout in Madison Square Garden. With each performance, he reinforced the idea that he was destined for the top. Then came Anderson Silva, a legend of the sport. Adesanya and Silva fought at UFC 234, and from the opening bell, it was a fight of striking skill and mutual respect. The fight was fast, technical, and filled with moments that left the crowd in awe. When the final bell rang, Adesanya had his hand raised in victory, securing a unanimous decision. That win set up a fight with Kelvin Gastelum for the interim middleweight championship. The fight was brutal, with both men pushing forward, refusing to break. Kelvin's relentless pressure tested Adesanya's endurance and resolve. By the final round, both fighters were exhausted, but Adesanya found another level. He landed a series of strikes that nearly finished Gastelum before the final bell. When the decision was read, Adesanya now stood as the new interim middleweight champion. With that belt came a unification fight against Robert Whittaker, the reigning middleweight champion. The fight took place in Melbourne, Australia, with over 57,000 fans in attendance, the largest crowd in UFC history at the time. Whittaker came out aggressive, looking to overwhelm Adesanya, but Israel's timing and precision were sharp. At the end of the first round, he landed a clean counter that sent Whittaker to the canvas, and in the second round, he did it again, knocking Whittaker out to become the undisputed UFC middleweight champion. As the referee stepped in, Adesanya stood over his fallen opponent, arms raised in victory. His journey from a kickboxing prodigy to a world champion had reached its destination. Now, I wasn't really familiar with Israel Adesanya's journey during his kickboxing days, but I was familiar with his UFC career. I am a big UFC fan myself, and I watched all of his fights, and I was, a big fan of what he was doing. He came onto the scene, he said what he was going to do, he believed in himself, and he said he was going to become a UFC champion. And so when I watched the fight live and I saw him do it, I was like, wow, that's pretty amazing. Very inspiring, and as an African myself, I was happy to see somebody that came from the continent, dominate the UFC and become a champion and rep his nation. Despite being based in New Zealand, Israel never forgot his Nigerian roots. He often spoke proudly about where he came from, repping the Nigerian flag in every chance that he got. In 2021, he finally made his long-awaited return to Nigeria as a UFC champion. He visited his old neighborhood, connected with fans, and met with dignitaries. For many Nigerians, seeing one of their own from their country conquer the world stage in such a dominant fashion was inspiring. He, alongside Kamaru Usman and Francis Ngannou, led the African takeover of the UFC. 3 African-born champions at the same time, something that nobody ever imagined. But as with all great stories, there are some setbacks. Adesanya had held the middleweight belt for years, defending it multiple times against top fighters. However, in 2022, he faced a man called Alex Pereira, a former kickboxing rival who had beaten him twice in the past. The fight was going well for Adesanya until it wasn't. Pereira landed a devastating flurry of punches that forced the referee to stop the fight. For the first time in his UFC career, Adesanya had lost his title. But if there's one thing that we've learned about him, is that he doesn't stay down for too long. In the rematch against Pereira in April 2023, Adesanya delivered one of the most satisfying knockouts in UFC history, reclaiming the belt with a brutal right hand that sent Pereira crashing to the canvas. The way he celebrated this victory went viral on the internet. While him beating Alex Pereira was an amazing moment, it was a time that didn't really last too long. He regained his championship belt, he beat the guy that he hadn't beaten before, he faced him many times, and he lost all his 3 fights, and he finally got one against him. And it's crazy how fast the ups and downs go in the fighting world. And one day you're on top, and then the next day you're not at the top of your sport anymore. Since then, he's lost a few fights, and his days of being a UFC champion seem to be over. Regardless of what he chooses to do next, he will always be remembered as one of the greatest champions in UFC history. From a bullied kid in Nigeria to a global superstar, Israel's story is one of resilience, ambition, and unwavering confidence. Whether he's dancing his way to the octagon or dropping anime references in his interviews or knocking out world-class fighters, one thing is for certain: Israel Adesanya is one of the most electrifying athletes of our time. And through it all, he has never forgotten where he came from.